Natasha, and thank you so much for joining me today. Well, we have got a cracker of a video. This is one that you cannot miss. This is all my favorite stencil techniques, and we are just going to rip right into this. So up first has got to be ghosting. Now, a couple of things that you do need. You need a water reactive ink for this. For example, distress inks, distress oxide inks, some of the Catherine Pooler inks, some of the Gina K dye inks. These are all going to be water reactive. I'm using the Gina K Tranquil Teal today, and I'm just using a single color. This can get crazy. I promise you there are so many different fun ways to do this technique. Here's the basic version, and at the end of every single technique, I'm also going to show you the cards that I created using these exact pieces. But this video is long enough as is. It's a quick show of how to do the technique, and then cards obviously finished with it. So I am just putting on a good, decent layer of ink. I'm fading it out to the corner here a little bit, thinking I'll pop a sentiment somewhere there. You do want a decent, good amount of ink because we are going to be lifting some using water. I'm going to use, this is a hex stencil from Holtz. Now, one thing about the Holtz stencils is that they are not very wide, so I'm going to mask off this just using a piece of copy paper, and I will do this twice over. All you need to do is spritz some water through your stencil. I like to lift my stencil up relatively quick because that way I seem to get the least seepage underneath. There are really two quick ways to do this technique. One is the spritzing with water that I'm doing here today. The other way is going to be just using like a damp cloth or a towel or a baby wipe, and you can just sort of gently scrub off, very gently scrub off the ink through the stencil. So same way, we're just using moisture to remove some of that ink, and then this is what we get from here. And of course, I said I'm going to show you the finished cards, but not the techniques of these because this would end up a super duper long video. I'm just trying to cram as many techniques in and show you without making it too short so that you can follow them, but these are just my favorite techniques when working with stencils. Right, next up we have the stamping or printing with the stencils. So this is an absolutely so fun technique that you can do with actually so many different products. I'm going to show you a couple today. As I said, this is more the condensed version of doing all of these techniques. This is the Festive stencil by Gina K. Now this does not matter at all what stencil you are using for any of these techniques. I'm just using a range. Sometimes techniques will lend itself to be better with more open stencils, and then other times it will lend itself better to being, you know, ones with finer details or finer lines or things like that. So it doesn't necessarily matter what stencil you've got, and I'll try and give you a bit of a cue as to which one might work better. This one truly is going to work with anything. I'm using a couple of colors here. I'm sticking with the Tranquil Teal because I absolutely love the teals from Gina K, and I'm also going to use some In the Navy ink, which is just a really dark blue ink. So I have a piece of cardstock underneath here, and I'm stenciling just like you would regularly stencil. So I'm trying to get that gorgeous pattern, but this one kind of is a little bit of a 2-for-1 sort of situation. We're just making the most out of our supplies, getting all of those fun patterns, and you can see that I've got the ink left on the stencil. When I lift this up, don't scrub it off. You can do two things. One, you can either spritz this with some water, which is what I am choosing to do, and then I get my piece of cardstock underneath, and it is a little bit drippy, but that's okay. I pop it face down, so now it has the ink side down. So it's kind of going to be the reverse of the actual stencil. I get a piece of dry paper towel. Now this is what I pop down, and it seems to soak up and help with those blurred lines that you can sometimes get. It soaks up the ink rather than the ink going onto your project. So I just generally give it a bit of a quick tap on the back, make sure that all of the stencil is making really good contact with your paper underneath, and then you can lift it up. And this is what we get. Of course, that corner is still blank because I didn't ink it on the first one, and I did get a little blob of water up there, but don't you worry, we can definitely make this into a card. In fact, we can make it into a stunning card. So essentially, you're taking the ink and you can stamp with it. You turn it over, press it down, and get the print of it. Now, can you just do this with the inks? No, I have some pastes here. We're going to use the same stencil, and I have some Hurley Lunar pastes here. And one thing about these is that anything that you can kind of water down with water, it's going to react well, then you'll be able to do this technique with them. So you can't do that, like once these dry, they become permanent. But once you're working with them wet, there are some really fun water techniques that you can do with these pastes. I have just masked off 2 pieces of cardstock using some mint tape. So that is just a low tack tape to mask off that area. And then just to make it a little bit different and make my cards turn out a little bit different, it's got nothing to do with the actual technique. Then I'm mixing 2 of the pastes, and I'm going to just get a bit of a kind of motley sort of look, I would say. Now we are going to do the same technique here because you can see that obviously there is paste on top of the stencil and we don't want to waste it. So I just move away my piece of cardstock so I don't get water on that to begin with, then pop it back in play, press the stencil down after I've given it a little spritz. So now it is sort of ink side down. And then again, I'm going to just pop a dry paper towel over top and soak up or mop up any liquid that might be peeking through. Now, honestly, how gorgeous was this? Maybe I should have used a piece of paper to do that. But I don't think that would have been quite absorbent enough. Anyhow, here is 2 gorgeous prints. And can we get a third one out of this? There was still ink left on this. And I was like, can we? I mean, sometimes you'll be able to, depending on which product, which media you're using. Ink, I would say generally you can sometimes get like a third ghost print, but it's not as clear, that's for sure. But that might be what you're after. You might be creating part of a background. But even the second one that we got there, the actual stamping that we did with it is stunning. And of course, I'm going to show you a card that we have made with these. Now, I would say that number 3 is still pretty clear. I really like that as a beautiful, subtle, easy background. I think that still looks pretty good. Now, these pastes are, of course, a little bit shimmery. They've got some mica in them, so they are absolutely stunning, and they're going to dry stunning as well. Now, here is the gorgeous print. Otherwise, perhaps you might have just used a cloth to wipe that all away, or popped it in the sink or in a warm thing of water and washed it all away. But actually, you can get these beautiful techniques. Give it a whirl and you can actually end up with some really surprisingly gorgeous results. Now, as I said, I'm going to show you a couple of the finished cards I created with these. A little piece of ribbon across the top and then some stamping for a birthday. I mean, these could truly be used for any occasion. Now, as I said, these are very quite shimmery, shiny. They really catch the eye. So absolutely stunning to use in your card making as well. And here's the stamped version that we did as well. Okay, now the next one is going to be dry embossing. And we are going to do this with our die cutting machine. So if you don't have one of those, then perhaps this one might be one to skip. But if you do have one, and I know lots and lots of crafters do, then this is a fun technique. So this is the embossing mat. It's like that squishy mat that we would put through with an embossing folder to get a good amount of pressure as you were to put this through your die cutting machine. I'm going to layer up my stencil. Again, I'm just using that Festive one from Gina, and then my piece of paper, and then that squishy embossing mat. I'm going to actually keep this like I would as a die. Usually if I were doing embossing with embossing folders, I would need to take out one of my mats or one of my plates because it would be too thick, but actually this one runs through perfectly well. You will need to adjust it to depending on what your machine is, but you can get gorgeous results and print that stencil to do some dry embossing. Right, next technique already, we are moving on to the offset inking. And again, I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to do this because this one has to be one of my favorite. Now, I am going to list all of the supplies that I can still find that are still available. I will list them in the description box below this video. So if you really like one of these stencils or you haven't seen one of the products or the pastes or something, then go down, check it out, have a look. You don't have to purchase, but sometimes it's about looking and seeing what you have that might already, you already have in your stash and might be similar. But there's a lot of products here, and so as I said, I will list them all down below if you want to check out. So by all means, if you can't find something, then leave me a comment in the comment section, but check down there first because they should be there if I can find them. First up, I'm going to use a couple of pink inks. Now, I did find out that I needed to hold my stencil down nicely. Perhaps even using a grip mat here would have worked as well, but I'm just happy crafting away. And so I'm going to do a light layer of pink with these gorgeous hearts. Now, I love that they're all irregular. They're all in different orientations so that it sort of doesn't feel like there's a right way to do this. So I'm using a really light ink to begin with, and then I'm going to move on to the darker ink. But actually, I forgot to show you in really carefully. I'll show you soon again in a minute with another one, but I'm actually lifting that stencil up, shifting it ever so slightly to the right and down, and then recoloring this on top. So I just put the stencil down, and do one light color, and then I shift the stencil ever so slightly to create that beautiful shadow. So here is the result of that. Now I am going to show you the results of just this one, but as I said, I'm going to show you some other ways that you can do this. Now it's a little bit tricky to see, but there is a light pink shadow over to the right, sort of the top and the right of every one of these hearts. Now, what happens if we want to take that a little bit further? Because I thought that this was absolutely gorgeous, and when I am crafting, I am just running with ideas. So at this point, I thought, I should put some like glimmery paste over top of this. This would be absolutely so fun. Now, I know that this one is definitely not available anymore. It is old, but thankfully it hasn't gone dry or anything, so I'm going to keep using it. Now, I ended up putting this glimmery sparkle paste over the entire darker, so not the shadow one that we did, but the second inking that we did to create the darker color, and this was stunning when it dried, let me tell you. And again, it makes it a little bit easier to see that shadow once it's dry. It's a little bit tricky when it's wet here. Right, let's move on. I want to show you using some different colors, and you'll be able to see it much more clearly here. This one is going to be the Lawn Fawn Craft cardstock, and I'm actually going to use some brown. Same stencil, I really like that stencil. As I said, it's gorgeous, but I'm going to be using, with the craft cardstock, some white pigment ink to create our shadow. So this is actually a pigment ink. It's going to sit on top of the paper, and that's why the white is going to look so stunning and bright. And I really like the Hero Arts Unicorn White pigment ink. Now I'm going to ink up completely all the way, all over the stencil, all over this page. And then I just want to make sure it is held really still so that we get a nice crisp print. And here I'm actually more dabbing the ink, I would say, than blending it on. I'm more dabbing it on to get a really thick application of this pigment ink. Then you may need to, depending on time, heat set this or dry it with a heat gun. I was a little bit short on time, so I am going to use the heat gun, and it fades back a tiny bit, but pretty good. It's still pretty crisp. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to shift the stencil down to the right again. So you can see that when I am going to move the stencil, you'll see a little bit of that craft cardstock. So I just shift it up. Actually, this time I shifted it up and to the right, and I'm going to ink completely over top. So we're actually going to be hitting a little bit of that craft cardstock that doesn't have white underneath it already. Then we're going to be leaving that white shadow. I absolutely love this technique. You can also do this when you are stamping as well, particularly with solid stamps. It works beautifully. But when you take this off, you can still see that there is a white shadow to the left this time of those gorgeous hearts. So this is one of my absolute favorite techniques. Really simple, takes barely any time, and it's also a stunning, cool effect of how did they get that? So I did a coffee card with this one. I ended up, that one was definitely my favorite as well. Right, shifting on, this is the stencil shifting technique. Now, I will say that I find this one works particularly well when you have something like diamonds or squares or rectangles, and there's a bit of space in between. You'll know what I mean once we get started, but this is going to be so simple. All I'm going to do to begin with is to ink up this gorgeous stencil, very plain, it's just diamonds, and the diamonds are well spaced out. There's definitely some blank space in between them. I'm using a little bit of mint tape to hold them down in place, and then I'm going to do some blue inking over top. So very simple, no shading, no nothing fancy, just inking up all of those gorgeous little diamonds. And you can see that this just covers my 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece of cardstock underneath pretty nicely. Once we do the stencil shifting, I am going to have to do some work there though because of the size of the stencil, but nothing gets in our way. Then I gave it a quick wipe off with a dry cloth, and this is where I'm going to shift this diamond stencil. Now this stencil is not made for this. Like, it's not specifically a shifter stencil. I know that there are a couple of brands out there that have them, but this is just a plain old stencil. It so happens that these stencils are going to fit beautifully. These diamonds are going to fit beautifully in between the other ones. And because the stencil is, partially see-through, we can see through it, I can line these things up beautifully. As I said, because of the size of the stencil, I will have to do it a couple of times, but honestly, that's no drama. I can line it up perfectly. It's really easy to do. So this time I chose to use a gorgeous brown. This is the Warm Cocoa from Gina K. And then you can stop wherever you like. But so this is just with the two colors. Even the one color looks, pretty good. Two colors looks pretty stunning. I quite like that look. And then what happens, you can just keep adding in more colors because these diamonds fit perfectly. So as I said, diamonds tend to work pretty well for this technique. There are definitely other shapes that work well, by all means. So have a look through your stencil stash. This is one that you will need sort of those particular stencils for. Then I'm going to shift it one more time because why not add a little bit more? And then I thought a yellow might look really nice in here. So I'm going to bring in some Wild Dandelion from Gina K. These are all gorgeous dye inks. And I do make sure to give it a bit of a wipe off in between because we don't want to transfer any of those colors. I want the yellow to be nice and bright. And again, as I said, because of the size of the stencil, I'm just going to keep shifting it around so that we can cover everything. But it's super easy to line up. Probably because of the transparency and that you can see all of the other inking that we have done. But you could also, as you can see, fit one more color in here. I quite like it being white. I quite like it just as is. But you could do like some ink, you could do some with paste, you could mix it up in between. But anyhow, here is the finished card that I created with this technique, stencil shifting. Right, on to the next one. This is one of the most fun ones because we are going to create our own. This often happens to me when I am die cutting out some cardstocks or die cutting out of plain white cardstock or papers or colors or anything, and I just think, actually, that's stunning. What's left over is absolutely beautiful. Now, this might be my most favorite die of all time ever. This is the Christmas branch die, and I know that is probably meant to be used at Christmas time, but for me, this is an all year round foliage die. I have this in almost every one of my videos. It is the perfect bit of foliage to add in behind die cuts, behind sentiments. Absolutely perfect. I've even die cut this out of some kids fun foam and used it as a stamp. Now we are going to cut this out of some regular white cardstock, and what was left over I'm going to use as a stencil. I'm taking some very light blue ink and doing a gentle inking in the middle of my cardstock here. This is going to be my card front. Then I'm actually going to trim this down to begin with, just so I have an idea of how big, where my placement needs to be, how big my end card front is going to be. And you can cut this down to anything. I really like having a little border around when I pop this down onto my card base. So often I like that 1/4 inch border, so I'll cut things down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. That's mainly because I make 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card bases, and that's what works well. Then I'm going to take some of that Warm Cocoa brown ink, and then this is not a special, stencil material. This is just, I cut out this gorgeous die out of a piece of white cardstock, and I really love the piece that's left over as a perfect stencil. And so we may as well use them. They might not last forever. Of course, they're going to last even shorter amount of time if you use wet media and things on them. But sometimes I've used these with paint, and the acrylic paints can actually make them stronger and stand up for a longer amount of time. So if you end up using like some acrylic paints over top of these, maybe they'll become even more sturdy. I am going to use this to the best of my advantage by masking off some bits and pieces. I don't want it to look absolutely identical on both sides. I want it to just look like several different stencils of branches. It might have been stamped, it might have been stenciled. You could even add in some white highlight lines onto some of these branches or leaves. You could use a stickles to highlight some of these little leaves. You could use a stardust pen, like a sparkle pen, to go over a little bit. You could even use a glue pen, a fine glue pen, and go over some of these branches and then add some foil to them. So many different ideas, but I'm just using this as a little stencil, as you can see, pulling in different parts of the stencil so that I can make it look, you know, really original and not just a carbon copy of each other in the top left-hand corner and the bottom right-hand corner. And then this was super easy. I filled in all these little bits and pieces, even just like a couple of little leaves, sometimes just to fill in that little space. As I said, using that gorgeous brown ink. I could have used some greens. I think that would have looked beautiful too, but I'm going with the brown and the blue. I quite like that combination today. And then, of course, you can stamp in a sentiment and things in the middle, but I will show you the finished card that I created with that. So don't forget to create your own stencils too. Now, that is going to wrap up this gorgeous video of all the best techniques with stencils. This is all my favorites wrapped into one video. Let me know which is your favorite technique in the comment section down below. As I said, all of the products that I have used that I can find, they will be listed down below if you're interested in checking them out. I appreciate that very much. But other than that, at the end of this video, YouTube also has some more that they think you will love as well. So don't forget to check those out and subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye!